All right, it's your boy speaking from the dungeon, and today we're going to be talking about how to talk to your customers, do a customer interview, and get a truly validated business idea. And this is going to be a powerful video, I'm telling you. So, if you remember my first video about how to get startup ideas, the essay by Paul Graham, one of the ideas that he lightly touches on is speaking to your customers or potential customers and trying to find a startup idea within that. And he says it's a good way, not the optimal way. And even though I'm a nobody, I kind of have to disagree. I think speaking to people is probably one of the most effective things that you can do because you're going outside of your own self, your own brain, and you're looking at a different person's perspective. And at the end of the day, if you're selling a product or service, you're not selling to yourself, you're selling to other people. So it's absolutely essential that you know what other people think. And so today's video will be about an essay by another great startup founder called Jason Cohen. He made Smart Bear and WP Engine, one bootstrapped, one VC'd. Both of them are unicorns. And he is an excellent writer. I actually love his essays. I think he's the best writer. So today will be about his iterative hypothesis customer interview method. And let's get into it. To give you a summary, this is how it goes. First, you set the goals, then you create hypotheses. From that, you do questions, then you do the interviews and you iterate on those, and then you stop once you get bored. So first is the goals. Now, there's quite a few goals that he lists in the article, but a few of them are like, okay, what does your perfect customer PC look like? What does PC do in a day? What are PC's jobs to be done? Things like that. I'm gonna list all of these questions in a Google Sheets below. Check in the description, and that resource should be helpful for actually creating your customer interviews and conducting them. The second is the hypotheses. So if you notice from the title, it's the iterative hypotheses customer interview method. Now, the hypothesis is essential because we're going from a way of being kind of random in how we conduct our customer interviews to being scientific about it. Because here's what most people do. They go into the interview just willy-nilly and they start like saying random stuff, like asking any kind of question that pops in their head. You need to be prepared and you need to have a good structure of how you think about the problem at the moment. There's actually a term in psychology called hypercorrection, and that is the idea that when you get corrected on a mistake, you're more likely to remember the actual good way to do it, rather than trying to learn the good way to do something in the first place. So by having a hypothesis, you'll be able to understand much better where you went wrong or what you got right by kind of making a prediction and seeing how it goes. And I'll give you a little spoiler. If you try this out yourself, you will see a lot of your hypotheses turn out to be wrong, even if you're an expert in your field. Even if you think you know everything in the world about what you do, you will probably be wrong. Because the thing is, the way that things play out in our mind and the things that play out in the rest of the population is just completely different. So it's absolutely essential to understand that you need to have a good structure of how you think about it, and that needs to be either validated or invalidated by the end of your customer interview, and that's why we have these hypotheses. Now, while we're touching on validation, a lot of people think that product validation or idea validation is when you go and pitch your idea to people and they'll tell you whether it's a good idea or not. And that can be farther from the truth. If you try to pitch your idea like a sales pitch to people, try to convince them, you guide them towards thinking that's correct. That's the correct way of doing things, that your idea is good. However, there's a certain danger in this. Those people will be kind of forced to say, like, all right, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It would be hard for them through social norms to say, okay, your idea is pretty bad, it sucks. Things like that, right? You want to be invalidated on your ideas. you want to be proven wrong for the most part. So, or not even proven wrong, but you want to find the truth. If you're pitching someone, you're trying to persuade them, that's not truth seeking. So what could happen is that you convince someone of something that is completely wrong, and then that would just be a complete failure. You'll be working on something that no one cares about. And that's why your questions also need to be open-ended. So next section, after you create your hypotheses for what your customer looks like and what they do, you create questions based on that. And those questions will be based on the goals of the whole exercise. Like, we want to find out this and that, and you want to tag each goal to each question that you have. You're trying to find a question for each goal, and you're trying to map it to each goal. Yeah. And then you can say, okay, I've done every goal. I've got a question for each one. I can see whether my hypotheses worked or not. And then you can say, okay, this was validated, this was invalidated. Then you actually have a source of truth. Then you're making progress. And then it's time for you to do the interviews. So the next step is interviewing and iterating. So you go into the interview, you have your questions ready, you talk to your customer, and you ask them the questions. See what they think, and not note it down. You might want to have like an AI note taker, like granola or grain or these random cereal names that exist. And then you want to keep track of the whole conversation. Obviously, ask for their permission first. Now that you've done this, you're actually on track to making progress. You're going to be seeing some results, some of them promising, some of them not. And you need to keep iterating. So one question will be answered, and one hypothesis will be proven wrong. And then you need to recreate your hypotheses. See what questions are producing good results, see what aren't, and see what hypotheses that you need to change and test out again. So let's say you want to create a video game for children to learn Spanish. I don't know, just randomly came up in my head. So you believe, okay, well, if children want to learn Spanish, then they need to have like a Spanish character, like Dora the Explorer. I don't know, man. So that's your hypothesis. You speak to some kids. You speak to some kids, and turns out they actually want Transformers, not Dora the Explorer, because Transformers are cool. And then you create a hypothesis that, all right, so children want something like a robot in their video games. That's kind of like how you could do it. Now, I'm just going off the top of my head, but when you actually have a proper company idea, this will just go much more smoothly. And you just iterate again and again and again. Now, after that, you reach a point where you just get bored. You go into each interview and you hear the same things again and again. That's when you know you need to stop. That's when you've hit the point. That's when you've made it. That's when you can say, all right, this is a valid idea. I keep hearing the same things. That's when you can say, all right, my hypotheses and my questions have all been validated, all done. And you can say, okay, I've done this successfully. And then you'll have a set of results. You have the recordings and all of the things that you've made, all of the questions you asked, the hypotheses you made, and then it's time to analyze the results. So there's two kind of ways that these can go. So firstly, you can see a lot of variation in the responses that you get. And this is not the greatest sign, because one, it either shows that you didn't put enough effort into your questions and hypothesis making process, or two, that your company startup idea is just not valid. Because here's the truth, the real problems in the world that companies and people face, they are very clear. The ones that are worth solving, the ones that people will pay money for, they're severe. People will know about it. It'll just become quite obvious to you. I think that's something I mentioned in the startup ideas video as well. You know, it's all about these things that are kind of obvious that we all know should be improved, but just don't get improved, right? So if you're seeing lots of variation, it's probably a sign that, you know, and like if you're seeing lots of variation and you've tried really hard in this process, it's probably a sign that it's not a good startup idea. And you shouldn't be sad about that. In fact, you should be absolutely elated, because on the other hand, if you didn't do this whole process, you continued with that bad idea, then you'd be wasting so much time doing something that nobody cares about, that would make you $0, and you'd be a brokey. On the other hand, let's say you keep hearing the same things again and again. It's very consistent, recurring problems, the same story again and again. You've got a pretty promising idea on your hands. And if you don't, then try to find another idea and see where you can go from there. Now, here's a few tips that Cohen mentions in his article. In the questions that you ask, one thing that you can mention is price. You can ask them about price. Now, all of the questions you ask should be open-ended, because you don't want to lead them anywhere. You want to be truth-seeking and find out how they think. But on price, you want to break this rule. You want to tell them a price straight up. And lots of people will find that very daunting. Like, how can I say a price? I haven't even created a product. You know, apparently you should never tell people the price of something. Let them want the solution first. But here's the truth about price. This is actually mentioned in another article by Cohen, that pricing is actually one of the most important parts of your brand. If you want proof, just think of Apple. Their phones don't cost anywhere near the amount that they actually are sold for. But it's the brand, right? They are sold as a luxury piece of technology. And so that's why they have to keep the prices up to reflect that brand. If Apple started selling the phones at the price that they were made by the little kids in China and the miners in the Congo, then, well, the brand would crumble. Same thing with Red Bull. The drink doesn't cost anywhere near the amount it does to make, but you know, we have to believe that it gives us wings, right? So pricing is actually an extremely pivotal part of your branding. And if you don't get the pricing right, then it can mean a lot of things for the success of your business. So you should just straight up give them a price, and you'll be met with 2 or 3 kind of responses. One, absolute outrage, absolute madness over the fact that you priced it so high. The other option is they're kind of confused, like, well, shouldn't it be priced a lot higher? Or is this, if this is priced so low, maybe it's not worth buying, maybe it's just a bad quality product. And maybe they might be happy with the price. That's the third option, and that would be great. But with this, you actually manage to solve a lot of your branding issues. And another insight that you can get from your results is how to speak, how your customers speak. And this will be massive, because you'll be recording all of these interviews, right? And what's essential is that you capture how the potential customer speaks. And this is really important. This will help for your branding, your design, your marketing, and everything in between. It will just make everything simpler. Let me give you an example. So Discord, if you've used Discord, it's basically like WhatsApp or any other messaging app or service. And they literally just call their group chat servers, which is weird. A server is like a piece of machine that, you know, runs some code and does internet services and whatnot. Why would you call a group chat the same thing as that, right? But what it turns out to be is the people, the gamers who are communicating online before Discord was made, they were talking using servers. That's how they managed their conversations. And so Discord, when they were catering to this group of people, noticed that language, and then they implemented it into their product. And so that just drives up the level of binding that the customer has to your product, how much they see themselves in it. You need to learn the language of your customers and be absolutely fluent in it. And these interviews will be massive for that. Another kind of question that you can ask is to ask your customers how they would describe using the product. So they don't need to know exactly what the product looks like, or they don't even need to know that a product could exist. They just need to know how they would solve the problem if it was just much more simpler to do. So let's say you had a health tracking app, or the problem was that people didn't know what biomarkers or whatnot they wanted to track and how to track it. They might say, okay, well, I wish I could just wake up, check my phone, and see how my health levels are, how my sleep was, and things like that. Or let's say you have a SaaS and your SaaS helps people do things in Excel. Well, they might say, okay, so if I had a product like this, I just want to open up Excel and see kind of the function on the right hand side, and it would just be right there for me rather than having to switch tabs and switch windows. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Things like that, they describe how they would fit it into their daily lives, and that will be massive for you when you design your actual product. And that is about everything that is mentioned, but obviously the article is absolutely splendid and you should read it if you have the time. Implement it. If you do anything, go out and talk to one potential customer today, that business idea that you've always been thinking about. Think about one person who might need that and just start an interview with them. But before you do that, look at the goals, look at the hypotheses that you make, create some questions, and throw out to them, see what they think. I'll put an Excel sheet down below or Google Sheets, and you can use that to scaffold your whole question and goals building. And that would be the absolute source on how to become a person who comes up with a great startup idea. Appreciate it, Jason Cohen, for the absolute amazing article. I don't know how he does it for free. And you may have noticed that this whole setup is a little bit different, and that is because I'm recording on my phone, hopefully better recording quality, and that's because of my guy, Harry Brandon. He was an absolute legend, came up with a comment, and I'm improving. I'm taking it on board, even though the recording setup is not the most ideal. But if you have any more improvements you think I should make, let me know down below and you will get a shout out. So appreciate it, guys. See ya.